Rich black man rejected by racist hotel staff returns the next day as new owner. Their lives would change one mistake. They had no idea who was standing before them. Changed permanently when the hue of a rich businessman's skin causes him to be booted out of a fancy hotel. They are unaware that they will be confronting him in a far different posture the following day. Now he makes the guidelines, and if you choose, they will have to discover the actual cost of their prejudice. Make sure you subscribe to learn how it all ends and avoid missing this and other stories Jade Hall ventured out from his automobile and inhaled, feeling the cool breeze across his flesh. Gazed up at the grand facade of the luxury hotel, its immaculate facade shining in the sun. This was. Jade has scheduled his crucial business meeting to take place in a conference that might turn his career around. Jade A. Though he was not new to the elite circles, wealthy black businessman was always conscious of the focus he attracted wherever he went today. Yet he felt more uncomfortable as he entered the hotel foyer. His keen eyes soon saw the icy looks directed from the personnel and visitors. It wasn't the first time he had seen such stares, yet there was something about this setting that felt different. An underlying resentment that pervaded the air. He adjusted his tie, straightened his shoulders, and headed to the front desk with a sure stride. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfect grin, turned to face him. Her attitude changed. She took in his look and gently focused on him just a second too lengthy, exposing a trace of discomfort before placating on a forced, "Good afternoon. How could I assist you?" she asked, her tone cautiously, but tinged with a detached formality. Jade responded with a superb afternoon offering. Courteous nod. "I'm here under Jade Hall, and I have a reservation under business meeting." The receptionist's smile stumbled somewhat, and she tapped rapidly, her eyes jumping between the screen and Jade on her keyboard. He could sense her hesitancy, and his intuition alerted him to something unusual. After a few minutes, she looked up, still smiling, but I noticed tension around her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. It looks there might be a," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "You sure you're at the right place?" "Mistake." Hotel. Jade maintained his cool while yet experiencing a familiar annoyance boiling under the surface. "I know this is the Great Westwood Hotel, just," he answered, his tone sharp but courteous. Before the receptionist could return, a man in a custom suit walked up to Mr. Evans, the hotel manager. His manner radiated power, but his walk exuded a clear arrogance. Looked at Jade briefly, dismissively, then turned to focus on the Evans inquired, his voice carrying a receptionist here an issue. Behaved well, although his contempt of the receptionist was hardly hidden. Uncertain on how to answer this polite man says he has a reservation, but I couldn't locate it in our database. She silently cast a sideways. Jade. Evans nodded, his eyes narrowing somewhat as he turned to face Jade. "I fear we have no record of your reservation, sir. Are you? You knew you had reserved a room here," and his voice was patronizing, as if addressing Jade's child who had wandered into an area they didn't belong. Kept his calm even if his tolerance was running low. "Yes, I am sure," he answered. "I can show Colin the email," confirming, his lips closed tightly into a tiny line. He waved his smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Not required." Hand dismissively, "But we do have some standards here. I would want you to ask leave if you do not have a confirmed reservation. The stress in the lobby would be avoided." Jade felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him as he thickened and sensed in those stares subtle accusations and presumptions grounded in just his skin tone and presence in this fancy restaurant he knew. Jade confirmed a reservation, hence this game all too well. His voice is forceful yet cool. "Kindly check once more for a crucial meeting." Evans's voice was called out, his expression stiffened, and he looked at the security guard standing nearby. "Gentlemen," assuming an authoritative voice, "kindly lead this man out of the hotel he is staying in." Obviously mistook the guards' motions in their hands hovering close to their radios. Jade sensed. Though he had no intention of starting a scene, his heart rate quickened was not going to slow down either. He reached into his pocket to get his phone, meant to present his reservation confirmation. The guards misinterpreted the movement as a menace. "Hands where I could see," one of the guards barking, his voice ringing across the lobby. A silence collapsed the space as visitors turned to see Jade's drama playing out. Feel his irritation growing. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he murmured, rising slightly. "I just getting my phone to show you the email. Sir, we need you to follow the other." Guard persisted on approaching Jade to witness the strain in their positions. The way their hands hung close to their belts, poised to intensify the matter. "If you do not leave," Evans watched with a haughtiness, apparently savoring the authority he possessed in this moment. Jade took a long breath. "We will have to remove you by force." His voice was oozing with phony kindness. He knew he could press the matter further, but the circumstances had already spiraled out of control. He weighed his choices. It wasn't going to satisfy them to see him lose his cool. Instead, he said softly. Out of control it wasn't. Steady even while the rage simmered under the surface. "I'll leave, but this isn't over," as he turned to go. Jade staggered as soldiers violently seized his arms and drove him towards the exit. Slightly his pride damaged but whole, he could hear the whispers and snickers of the bystanders. Some find the judgmental glances dulling his business back off. Outside, associates who had been waiting for him gazed in horror and disbelief. Jade fixed his jacket, smoothing off the marks caused by the guard's aggressive treatment. He paused to gather himself while his mind runs with ideas on how to address this injustice. He took out his phone and discovered his associates were already reluctant about his business meeting having been compromised. Now rocked by the display they had seen, yet as Jade stood there he felt a fresh will within of him and looked back at the great entrance of the hotel, now marred by the memory of prejudice and humiliation. This was not going to finish here. This was only the beginning of instant news. Went like wildfire on social media. Video footage of Jade being mistreated by security went popular with thousands voicing indignation over the obvious. Racial profiling and discrimination started people advocating boycotts and demanding responsibility. The hotel's standing sank by evening. Their social negative remarks swamped media pages, and news sources grabbed hold of the narrative, highlighting even more the fallout behind the scenes. Jade was already moving. He had contacts and resources the hotel management might have used. Hadn't expected the decline in the hotel's stock value would present a wonderful chance. He got in touch with his financial staff, and within hours they started haggling on a bought by midnight. Jade Hall was now the new proprietor of the stately Westwood Hotel, explained as he stood outside gazing at the structure with which he had just yesterday was a place of shame and humiliation. He knew he would be returning not as tomorrow's unpleasant visitor, but as the one wielding all the authority. Jade Hall stood outdoors the great Westwood Hotel the following morning. He felt a calm satisfaction settle over him. The sun was only starting to create long shadows over the hotel's lovely front. Today, he wasn't the embarrassed visitor hauled from the premises. Now he was the new owner. The actions of the previous day had established the platform for what was about to erupt. The indignation over the viral footage of his maltreatment had destroyed the hotel's standing overnight. Investors were terrified, and Jade noticed that the stock value of the hotel nose dropped. Chance and grabbed it at the sun setting. He had purchased a dominating interest in the great Westwood. Now he was here to arrange things right. He changed his outfit and moved over the whirl-around glass doors. Only a few people were milling around the known. The lobby was still awakening. Faces of the employees who had handled him with effort just one day before were suddenly shocked, and disbelieved whispers soon started to flow among them as they noticed who had simply entered without stopping. Jade moved to her cheeks paled when she identified the same young receptionist from yesterday. She straightened her former haughtiness and replaced uncertainty with "Good morning," Jade said. "Coolly, I have to talk with your manager right now." The receptionist nodded silently, her hand shaking slightly as she answered the phone. A few moments later, Mr. Evans, the back office manager who had planned Jade's public humiliation, looked at him. Confident attitude has vanished overnight from the haughtiness from the previous day was replaced with a confused and hardly hidden expression and anxiety. Mr. Hall Evans started trying a forced-looking pleasant smile. "What brings you back here today?" "Jade needs our help here." Grinned, but It was not the kind smile Evans might have wanted. Was the kind of smile bearing the weight of knowledge exactly who was in. "Yes, there is indeed something you could help me with, Jade," answered he. Took a folder from his briefcase and set it on the reception counter these days. "Are the records verifying that, for a brief period, I am now the majority owner of the Great Westwood Hotel?" The lobby appeared to stop in time. Evans's eyes grew wide, and he turned from Jade to the papers and back again, his face paling by. The second, he rapidly picked up the papers using a shaky hand. "This cannot be correct." Colin fumbled, his voice just above whisper. Jade answered, "There must be some error here." Voice firm and calm. "Right now, I am the one in majority share." A heavy silence descended the foyer as the personnel and guests worked through. Evans stood there shocked and mute. What had just been revealed? Mind running to make sense of yesterday's events. He had been on top. Secure in his power, and based on today's presumptions, everything had changed. "Mr. Evans," Jade kept his tone strong. "Kindly collect all the employees in the main hall. We have a required meeting in minutes." The whole hotel staff gathered in the great hall. Whispers permeated the space as workers cast nervous looks. The air was heavy with doubt and anxiety. Some had seen the viral video, others had merely heard tales. Now it was abundantly evident that Jade, under new management, stood at the front of the room's crowd, was clearly nervous as he surveyed them. Those who had hitherto enjoyed affluence and power were now reduced to uncertainty. He knew this would not be able to be simple, but it was essential. Jade started, his voice bearing a quiet authority that muffled the space. "For people without my name is. Jade Hall is the new proprietor of the stately Westwood Hotel as of last night." Murmur rippled across the assembly. Jade let it calm before starting again. "I'm sure you all witnessed what happened yesterday, or at least heard about it. What transpired in this hotel was unfair discrimination based on prejudice, and mistreatment of any guest shall not be accepted here." From this point on, his statements were greeted with a mixture of shock and several workers nodded, maybe in guilt or shame. Others looked obstinate, their mouths set in fierce defiance. Jade said with urgent tone, "Unyielding Mr. Evans, you are free of responsibility as manager. Your behavior yesterday was unacceptable. You could get your belongings and leave the grounds." Colin's face turned to dark. He opened his lips to object, but one glance at Jade's face indicated it would be because the power dynamic had turned totally and there was no space left. Negotiating, he nodded stiffly and silently turned to leave the room. Jade's pride clearly broke as he went on for the rest of the staff. "We're going to rebuild this hotel from the ground up. Thus, I am enforcing a rigorous training program on respect for every worker, from the cultural sensitivity equality." Jade held up a hand. "Top down, this isn't optional." Several hands shot up. "I realize some of you might not agree with this, therefore you're free to stop them. Free to depart should you find it difficult to follow these fresh ideas. For those who decide to stay, aware that this is about more than just retaining your employment. It's about improving on learning from past experiences." A few staff members glancing nervously. It was evident that some were finding it difficult to adjust to the new reality they had ran under a certain perspective for years, one whereby they were participants now had to decide whether to adjust or depart as the conference. Jade watched the crowd split and felt the undertone of unhappiness among some of the staff members. He understood that altering a deeply rooted culture would not occur overnight. Resistance would exist, maybe even sabotage. But Jade walked later that day ready, walking the hotel's hallways, watching the personnel go about their business responsibilities. He could hear the whispers, saw the dubious looks directed. Some of the senior staff members, those who had been there for years and knew how to manage things their way, were the most respected. They mumbled among themselves, forming hazy preparations to challenge the new norms as the Jade watched the audience go and felt the meeting ended. Undercurrent of discontent among some of the staff. He knew, not naive, changing a profoundly rooted culture would not happen overnight. There would be opposition, maybe even sabotage, but he was ready. Later that day, Jade was browsing the hotel hallways, seeing As the employees carried out their responsibilities, he could hear the whispers, observe the dubious looks directed some ways. Of the senior staff members, those who had been there for years and were accustomed to handling affairs their way were the most resistant. They mumbled among themselves, forming hazy plans to subvert the new regulations I have heard of some of. You are not pleased with the modifications Jade mentioned. A small group of staff members were startled and hastily straightened themselves. Faking false smiles lets me be clear. I'm here to not punish anyone. I'm here for make this a better environment for you and our visitors, but if you believe you can keep using your old methods, you will discover that you are quite wrong about the staff members moving uneasily not. Jade nodded, content that his point had been taken under consideration, daring to contact his eye. Early on, he was establishing the tone. Tolerance for would be absent for insubordination or sabotage behind closed doors, yet the rumblings of discontent persisted among a few employees, guided by a former senior manager who had been demoted to a lesser level started to subtly plot means of oppose the changes they muttered about failing Jade's attempts to disseminate. Unaware of these changes he had expected, speculations around the staff about sowing discord. Jade had already started staffing new employees, especially those who had faced discrimination and were anxious for a fair opportunity. He understood these fresh graduates would be absolutely vital in determining in. For instance, as the days went by, the TION in the hotel developed. The scales were tipped. Workers who had formerly felt safe in their roles now felt some were eager to change, to learn and develop in this fresh environment. Others angrily clung to their past practices and biases, their resentment. Jade watched it with a calm, purposeful seething right under the surface. This was a test for them as well as for him. Would they rise to the challenge? Would they fall from the weight of their own conceit? Only time would tell. One thing was clear, though: the stately Westwood Hotel would never be the same. Once more, the days Jade Hall took over the stately Westwood Hotel. Everyone could sense the tense and transforming change hovering around the great lobby. Previously occupied with self-assured workforce members and bosses proud of their now hummed with uncertainty, Jade's new policies had rocked the fundamental basis upon which this hotel had been constructed, and the Fishers were beginning to present the required courses on mandatory cultural sensitivity and equality, approaching immediately. Previous top managers and supervisors, many of whom had long thought they were beyond criticism, now found themselves seated shoulder first time to shoulder with junior workers in small conference rooms. They have to face their prejudices in face, with unpleasant reality about their prior actions, and pay attention to the viewpoints of those they had routinely discounted or. Jade made it quite evident from the beginning that the training was not just a formality. Every worker was expected to engage fully, and everyone, no matter their title or seniority, was now determined by their adaptability. Thus, learn resistance to these new norms would not be accepted in the times when followed a notable shift in the staffing arrangement of the hotel, several of which had formerly filled leadership jobs were moved to entry-level positions. The former assistant manager, once proud and commendable, today discovered herself employed in the restaurant of the hotel, a position she had once gazed down at her, now tending to visitors alongside the very folks she had previously disregarded or mocked. The changes Evans, the former's behavior, most strikingly reflected. Manager deprived of his power, Evans was sent as a concierge this new responsibility by personally engaging with visitors attending according to their requirements, and most crucially engage in the type of humility and client service he had hardly shown in his former job. Jade saw he was intently observing the slight changes in his attitude from the rigid resistance. If a man not used to receiving instructions on how to gradually quit from someone who, without any option, Brian, the previous kitchen supervisor, who had once directed the culinary crew with an iron grip, now on the cleaning crew scrubbing flooring and washed dishes, his hands rough from the task Jade had once entrusted others. Jade saw one day he was mopping the lobby floor, moaning to himself, his formerly confident countenance now twisted with. Jade, meantime, brought in fresh staff, especially people, and anger and frustration From underprivileged communities experiencing prejudice in their former employment, these new employees were given chances to oversee and provide ideas for the hotel's makeover, one of which a young Black. Originally a front desk worker in another hotel, Aisha was elevated to oversee the guest relations team. Different hotel. However, despite her credentials, she had been denied advancement several times. Now she was assigned task establishing a new benchmark for diversity and service at the Grand Westwood Old Guard. Past leaders and supervisors struggled with their reduced duties and the new power dynamics they encountered, thus finding their way was challenging. For some, the transfer in authority simply resulted in growing animosity. For others, however, the encounter started to cause reflection gradually, but definitely they, as the weeks went by, began to view their previous attitudes and actions in a fresh perspective, started to change the initial antagonism, and our resistance started to give in the motel. Jade was present every day, roaming the floor, a quiet, uneasy acceptance. Speaking with the personnel and closely monitoring the dynamics, he recognized that actual transformation wouldn't come overnight. It was a very methodical process, needing both. Throughout one of the training courses, patience and tenacity throughout an exciting. A former front desk supervisor, Linda, who had been relegated to a bellhop, spoke up. She had been first resistant, but something had changed in her. "I have been wondering," Linda replied softly, addressing the group. "I never realized how much I was evaluating individuals according on appearances. I thought I was being professional, but maybe I was just being unfair." Aisha, the guest relations head, now nodded and said, "It's not only about manners, but also about realizing that, regardless of appearance or background, everyone deserves respect and decency." Linda gazed down from processing the words. "I suppose I still have much to learn," she admitted. Times like this offered Jade hope that some of the employees may show room for development, while others stayed hardened, not allowing their old biases, Jade knew, to fade. These were those who would finally have to leave, either by will or by coercion. The former workers most resistant, Brian and a few others included, started to plot behind closed doors. They murmured of bringing Jade down, filing. Jade was aware of these murmurs and protests, even planning a walkout. Expected this from the beginning and got ready by calling a secret meeting. "Knowing some of you are unhappy with the reforms he started, I know these disgruntled staff members feel like you have been demoted or insulted, but consider why you feel that way. Is it due to unfair treatment you have received, or is it because Brian is at last being treated equally but unable of control his annoyance?" Shouted out, "This isn't what we signed up for. You can't simply come here and change everything." Jade's gaze turned upside down, meeting his cool, calm but resolute. "Actually, I can and I did. I'm giving you an opportunity to be part of something better, since what this location was built on wasn't appropriate. That's up to you. You might decide to develop or to travel." The chamber dropped. Jade was obviously not going to back down. He had no desire in making concessions to people who were reluctant to adapt. As the days stretched into weeks, then into months, the Grand and Westwood Hotel had a significant change. From once strict hierarchy started to collapse, replaced with a more inclusive and dynamic framework. The new, particularly those who had experienced prejudice abroad, workers blossomed in. Their innovative ideas and energy gave the parts their vitality, poured new life to the visitors of the hotel. Started to see the variations in the hotel's energy. Various more friendly and real people began discussing the Big Westwood as a metaphor of transformation, and positive reviews of the hotel's newfound dedication to diversity and other values started to circulate online, praising. The turning point came when Mr. Evans, the previous manager now serving as a concierge, happened to run across. There was a Black family in the lobby, which reflected the Jade incident, except the roles were inverted. Colin's face grew pale as he understood the weight of the event. He gave the family their room keys, paused, his hands shaking as he voice trembled as he welcomed the Grand Westwood. "If there was anything you could, please let me know." The family thanked him for the first time and smiled. Evans saw himself through their eyes, watched the confusion and terror he had once caused on those he had once known. realized at that instant the whole weight of what Jade had been trying to impart to them all. It wasn't only about equality in terms of words, it was about witnessing it that evening. Evans went to Jade with his posture no longer rigid with pride, but rather modest. "I suppose I'm beginning to understand," he whispered softly, "and I never knew how much I took for granted the degree of contempt I have for individuals." "I'm sorry," Jade nodded, sensing Colin's voice is sincere, hence it is difficult to alter. He answered, "But realizing that is the first step. If you're ready to grow, you have a space." One by one, additional staff members started to match the opposition offered. Way to grasp, and the hotel started to flourish under gradually, but definitely. Others who stayed became advocates. Others who couldn't adjust went. The majestic Westwood Hotel was for the new vision by the conclusion of the third month. It was no more only a place of luxury, it was a place of education and progress. Redemption's metamorphosis occurred in its people as much as in its policies. Looking out over the busy city below the long and difficult journey, Jade stood in his office. That it was only the beginning and had set out to create rather than exact retribution. Anything better, and knew he had succeeded the way the hotel came to life in ways he had only imagined. Old system had collapsed, yet from its ruins a new order had evolved, one constructed on respect, equality, and fairness. This new order lacked space for prejudice. The majestic Westwood Hotel discovered its new chapter, and so had everyone living inside its walls. Disclaimer: this channel is opposed to all forms of discrimination, bigotry, intolerance, and human rights violations. The narratives presented here are original works that were crafted to foster constructive dialogue, comprehension, and introspection. The production of all content is guided by a dedication to the preservation of human dignity and the respect for diversity.